Welcome to part 2 of the podcast episode with Dr. Pete Dawson. In this second half of the episode, we talk to Pete a little bit more about the university and the experience that the students can gain from his modules and the UEA. So you've now developed this module for 7-8 years since being here. What does the module offer to students now? So for me, it was the excitement of being able to apply the knowledge that I had, looking at some more business aspects and, using my economic skills and applying it to sport. From your perspective as the lecturer, what skills does it give to final year students?
So, and I think this is where the module has evolved over time, particularly in the business dimension. So the first half of the module, part of the task there is we do some financial analysis, and one of the skills that students get is that we actually look at company accounts, and some students might have had some prior experience of that, but there's no requirement that they understand a set of financial accounts. But I think that's a useful tool to have, and obviously being able to then understand elements of the account, so in terms of the profit and loss account, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, but then picking out the relevant pieces of financial indicators which you can then use to kind of develop an understanding of how the financial position of clubs and leagues and organisations have changed over time. So obviously there are a number of skills there. There's obviously the skills associated with understanding a set of accounts, but then utilising the information in those accounts in a way to then test. It might be an intervention policy, or it might be a structural change or a rule change. You did Formula One, really?
Yeah.
So it might be, and it can be applied to a whole range of different sports. And I think that's the other thing, just going back to what we were saying earlier, is this breadth of sports. And Formula One has become quite popular now, whereas maybe 10 years ago there might have been one or two at most students interested in doing Formula One as part of the assessment for the module. There's now, I'd say, about 10 or 15% of the cohort wanting to do Formula One for at least one of the assignments. So that's the first piece of work. The second piece of work, which is more of a kind of empirical based kind of exercise, which does involve doing econometrics, because that's my bread and butter. And obviously, in terms of doing that, and again going back to what we were talking about earlier, there are still opportunities for doing demand. Even the attendance demand, which is basically where I started, there's still opportunities to do an empirical piece of work, trying to understand why people go and watch sporting contests, whether in person or on TV. Although the data availability for those for the TV audience is a bit more limited. We also talk about kind of production, looking at sporting production functions. So again, applying economics in a kind of, I think, a useful way, an interesting way, in a sports kind of dimension. So a number of students typically take one of those two topic areas. They're kind of, broadly speaking, sports analytics. And frankly, I could do a separate module just on sports analytics. And it's, again, something we thought about, myself and Richie, who co-teaches on the module with me, is there are so many things that we could do that we can't currently include in the module, like things like major sporting events, which has featured in the past, but it's then meant that some topic areas have been kind of sidelined as a consequence of that. And then the other topic area that we currently do, where again there's a lot of interest and growing interest, is in terms of incentives, particularly applied to individual sports. And here we've seen such a wide range of sports being considered over the last, since the module has existed here. And this year, for example, as well as your sport, Ruby, powerlifting, we've had gymnastics. We've also had some, for the first time, so gymnastics and powerlifting for the first time, even Australian rules football. Again, so the range of sport, obviously football does dominate still in terms of interest and in terms of topics chosen for the assessment. But it's really pleasing to see just how wide and broad the choice of sports has become. So that second assignment is more about developing those empirical based kind of skills, kind of building on the econometric skills that students would have been taught in the second year.
Yeah, I mean from a student perspective, I didn't really enjoy econometrics in second year.
I didn't teach you, Ruby, so
no,
maybe,
exactly.
Maybe
It was your excellent teaching in third year. But no, I think econometrics in second year was a little bit how I felt about maths A level. There, I wasn't applying it to things I loved. I wasn't applying it to things I enjoyed. I was applying it to a random data set. This was the first time I was doing it. Whereas third year on this module, I'm applying it to talk about Formula One, and I want to find out if these results are true, if they're statistically significant, what these interventions mean within Formula One. So yeah, I think again a lot of people ask about mathematics or data analytics, how to use data, and same thing. I tell everyone, when you get into third year and you're applying it to things that you're genuinely interested in, the perspective of doing that data analysis changes, because you want to find the answers, you want to know what's going on, you want to write a good report about the sport that you enjoy. Because again, it's something that you can talk about. I feel like it's something that it's a module that I've spoken about to my mum, to my dad, to my friends. So sometimes you can't go and talk to them about macro or micro or.
It's more difficult, maybe difficult conversation to kind of break.
Whereas
maybe,
this is very applicable. I was, sharing different results with my mum, and she was really, really interested. So I think, as a module, it really enhances the skills that you've learned in second year, because you're genuinely interested on how to apply them and the results that you find.
I mean, the other thing, just to kind of segue a little bit, Ruby, is as we talked about earlier, this is not a module that's offered in lots of universities. So it's almost like trying to kind of sell. Why do we have a sports module? Well, partly we have a sports module because it's Pete's research interest, and therefore he's developed a module to kind of showcase some research-led teaching. But actually, it's broader than that, because the way I see it is, obviously you could, if we didn't have a sport module, you could think about this as being a branch of industrial economics, industrial organisation, because the sports industry is an industry in one sphere. You could say it's a branch of labour economics, which is where it kind of developed from. But the reason why I believe it's so interesting as a standalone module is not just about the fact that we've got all this data and we can use this data and we can test things and so forth, and so on and so forth. It's the fact that the industry is so unique, because it's very much unlike any other industry. You take any other industry, like the grocery market, for example. If you're a Tesco's, a Sainsbury's, an Aldi, a Lidl, an Asda, a Waitrose, what are you trying to do? You're trying to dominate the market. You're trying to generate market power. You want to drive out your competitors, because if you drive out your competitors, we know, from basic microeconomics, if you become a monopolist, you can generate higher prices, you can generate more revenue, you can generate more profit. Doesn't work in sport. Because sport, we know the essence of sport is about competition, and it's competition on the field of play, but the counter to that is that we have cooperation off the field. Because the idea being that if you have too much dominance, consumers, fans, broadcasters, sponsors, advertisers will ultimately lose interest. So you can't have the kind of dominance
Yeah.
that other firms in other industries want to take. And that brings up lots of intriguing things, because the other thing that we know in most sports is that you have big teams, small teams, or strong competitors and weaker competitors. So what do? What kind of things can you bring in to try and make the competitiveness or improve the competitiveness of those sports? So things like financial fair play in football, or salary caps in rugby and basketball. Do you change the rules, like in Formula One, to try and make the races more competitive? Again, there've been lots of rule changes in Formula One. Some have worked, some haven't worked. I mean, currently, there's been arguments about whether this season is it more competitive because there's more overtaking, or is it not? I mean, I don't think, obviously the jury's still out. So, very much the governing bodies, the organisers, very much know that they've got to provide an interesting product for the consumers, and by which they've got to try and make the contest as less predictable than as they can. So.
And that was one of the most interesting kind of lectures that we had.
It's the very first lecture, Ruby, so maybe it went downhill after that.
But because I remember, sitting there as a consumer of sport and actually recognising the fact that, when a team gets too dominant, it becomes boring. But I hadn't thought about the impacts of that. Yeah. So I really liked the first lecture.
Cool.
And the others afterwards. They're all right.
And I think just looking at that whole idea of applying a production function in sport, which again is a production function you would have been taught in micro, probably quite boring, looking at, factors of production, labour and capital, very abstract concepts, important concepts, but quite abstract, but then seeing how that can again be applied in a sporting contest, because in much the same way, you have an output, which is the result of the contest itself, but then your factors of production being labour, and obviously the field of play being the capital and the resources, etc. It's just a nice way of then, bringing in some of that economics knowledge and applying it to the module. So
maybe a little bit of a difficult question, but within the next 5 years, how would you like to develop the module? Is there something specific that you'd like to implement? I know we've mentioned briefly that there's been a bit more implementation of individual sports now that the data for individual sports is increasing. But is there something specific that you'd like to implement within the next, 5 years, say?
I mean, as I said earlier, there are lots of topic areas, and we almost feel like constrained, because there would be some topic areas we'd like to do, but we can't currently cover. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd split this into 2 modules. I'd have one which is more on the business side, business and finance, and concentrate on that, and maybe the economics, and then a separate one on sports analytics. Now, obviously, that might happen, but in terms of how the module has developed, certainly the last couple of years, I think one of the things that we've been very conscious of to try and include and develop more of is in terms of women's sport. And I think, and again, that's something that's evolved over time, and I've been fortunate enough that I'm currently doing some consultancy work which is looking at women's sport, and I've been mindful, even for the last few years, of developing examples, more material, maybe opportunities in the assessment to do comparative analysis that includes not just men's sport but also women's sport. And again, this is something we've seen increase over the last few years, so there are more examples now of students doing assessments which involve comparative analysis of men's versus women's sport. So, going back to some of those examples from earlier, your powerlifting one had male and female participants. The Australian rules football study was a comparison of men's Australian rules compared to women's Australian rules, because again, what we've seen certainly over the last few years is the data's been quite rich for the men's side for quite a number of years now.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been the case for the women's side, and we've seen that develop a bit more, and there's more data, there's more opportunities to investigate women's sport. And again, only over the last couple of years have we've had students do financial analysis which looks at the women's side and not just the men's side. So I think doing more of that. I mean, from a personal point of view, bringing back in the major sporting events aspect could be, but again, it's finding space to do that. But also not just looking at the Summer Olympics or Winter Olympics, but also looking at the Paralympics.
Yeah.
Because again, I think there's been an underdevelopment there in terms of those areas. So lots of things I'd like to develop, but it's obviously trying to find space in the module to do that. But particularly the gender aspect is the one that has become more prevalent within the module and will continue to become more prevalent as we...
Yeah, well, even in a section of mine, it was adding variables to see, do women have more effects to incentives than men?
Yeah.
And that's a very small thing I looked at very briefly, but again, could be, a whole report on that, how it affects, the men versus women in powerlifting and how the incentives impact their performance.
So has the work that you've done for the sport module influenced the way that you see competition now? Because obviously you're competing in national and international tournaments, Ruby. So has there been any or not, or have you kept it completely separate?
Well, for me, no, because the monetary incentives that I spoke about in my assessment only come into play at Sheffield.
Yeah.
As you'll know, if you read my thing, which obviously I'm not at Sheffield. But yeah, it does make me look at things differently. I think we've just had the European Opens, for example, and...
Which you competed in?
No, I competed in
a
different one.
Okay, fine.
Still European, No, this is European Open. But we've just had the European Open, and there's a couple of athletes who competed there who also competed at Sheffield. And I look at it in terms of dominance. Yeah. I didn't watch them sessions because you know exactly who's going to win. Or you look at them sessions and all of a sudden who's coming first and second doesn't matter. You're actually more interested in the midfield competition of maybe fourth or fifth because there's new people competing internationally. So there's that side, but also the fact that, so for example, one of the girls who won the 84 plus category, Sunita, she won on an RP6 day, which is a very easy day. Basically, like she'd gone in and had a training session and she'd won the whole competition in her weight class, rather than going in, having an RP10 really difficult day, showing her best lifts, going for world records. She didn't do that. So it definitely gives me more knowledge and different viewpoints, I would say. So for your final question of the day, Pete, for second years looking at taking this module in their final year, what benefits would they gain from taking your module?
So we touched upon the skills they would get in terms of the assessment of the module, but in a more broader sense, obviously you should do the module if you've got some interest in sport, and obviously that's going to be beneficial and that's going to be helpful in terms of you being motivated to do the module itself. But I think in a kind of broader sense, I think it's interesting to employers because I've heard other students when they've gone to apply for graduate jobs, grad roles, and they've got to interview stage, and they've been asked the question about the modules that they've chosen, and those that have chosen the sport module typically sparks an interest in the employers along the lines of, oh, that sounds interesting, tell us about that module. So again, there's a kind of broader perspective here. You don't necessarily have to take the module and then think about going into the sports industry. I mean, there is a pathway there. It's quite tricky, but I think in a much broader sense, it is a conversation starter with employers.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed.
It's a pleasure, Ruby. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.